I think Rashford can consider himself lucky to be in the side. I mean, I think the FA are a bunch of clowns anyway.
That's a disrespectful thing to say, isn't it?
What you seem to believe is that people can't have a critical observation, and you just characterise something that I didn't say, right? I've also seen Phil Foden playing for Man City wide on the right and rip Liverpool a new one. He doesn't even know what he would do. I just gave him an example to give it. He's been banging on forever about player welfare. I give him an opportunity to say it, and he comes up with nothing.
It's talkSPORT, Sam Matterface with Simon Jordan and with Martin Keown. England strolling through their game against Albania on Friday night. Didn't concede one shot on target. Do you have to accept, Martin, that that's sort of international football at this level? England don't get to choose their opponents, and when it comes to World Cup and European qualifying, largely, most of them are teams that they're always going to beat, and it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, I think it was an interesting game to watch, to see what the manager wanted, what his beliefs were. Very interesting to hear what he had to say afterwards, that the players will decide the system that we play ultimately on. I've got different options. I want to see how they play as a group with this current system. He wanted to have 4 players, offensive players in the final third, with a hybrid midfield player in Curtis Jones trying to make it as a 5th player. He wanted more pace, he wanted aggressive running in wide areas. I think the one thing I'll say, Phil Foden's never going to be giving you that, never going to offer you that. He's subsequently said that we needed better connections with Phil Foden, and we needed to, maybe the 10, Bellingham needs to go out and be closer to him so we can actually build with him. But essentially, it was a good structure to the game. He was happy with the way that they played. I agree with all of that. I think we've got a modern day manager that is flexible in how he can play. We won a Champions League with a back 5 system, which he came in and put in place very effectively. So he's sort of like, this is early for him, but he's a quick learner, a hugely intelligent manager. It was great to listen to his honesty, frankness afterwards. And we have another opportunity tonight to see what he wants to do. I think he's going to rest people. He doesn't want to use the terminology dropping people.
Well, he actually said he's not dropping anyone because of poor performance, and he wanted that out there, despite the fact that he did sort of single out Foden and Rashford for performances. Although he said, actually, when he was speaking yesterday, I don't know what the controversy is here, because it's not a personal criticism of those two. Actually, it's more about us not feeding them with the ball.
Yeah. But, you know, it did die off, though, in the second half, which he'll admit.
It certainly did, especially second. I mean, they invited a bit more pressure than they'd experienced throughout the whole game for about a 15-minute period, didn't they?
And the Lewis Skelly goal comes from a run, which effectively is affecting the back line. So he wants more running off the ball. It's pass, pass, pass. You know, we've seen a lot of this with Arsenal, haven't we? Bringing up my team, who pass the ball an awful lot, and then you want to see those runs in behind. So it comes, ironically, from an Arsenal player. But he wants to see more of that. But I think it's great that we've got, and I think I'd like to think behind the scenes that someone is following everything he does, every move he makes, so that we can tap into a German coach and see how he does things differently and effectively. But it's tactically how we'll see whether or not this manager now can bring to the England team for them to be, the next step for them is to win a trophy, Simon, isn't it? Absolutely. So the World Cup coming up, we've got the qualifications, that's the first step in that process. But first of all, I've been impressed with him. And it's up to the players now to take that to the next level.
What do you think?
I think it's very difficult for him to make an impact very early on, because he's only been with the players for a very short period of time. And if you look at that squad, that team that he put out there, I would be curious to see how many of them are going to make it to being part of the England setup for the framework when they get into the real tournament, because we'll qualify for the World Cup, as we should, given the group that we've got. I don't think people like Dan Burn and a few of the other players that are out on that particular game last night will make the final cut when it comes down to who is his established 11. I think Rashford can consider himself lucky to be in the side. I think Foden won't play in that position because it's not his best position. Saka will play there, even when he's fit. So some of these conversations that he's having are almost moot, because they are him trying to establish an outlook of this position. He obviously feels that for years and years and years, whatever way you want to cut it, he doesn't think that England players perform at the level that they could perform and do perform for their clubs. So he wants to change their outlook and as quickly as and be brave with the ball. I think the observations, there's been more made about what he said, more analysis than he actually said himself. People started to analyse Foden on the back of the fact that he was a little bit disappointed that the wingers didn't get out of their fullbacks as much as they'd like them to. But then the analysis turned into even more column inches rather than what he said, and people then talked about Foden's, having a particular aversion to the touchline and wanting to come inside every single time. There's players out there that I think can step up levels. I think Declan Rice can do more than he does for England, and whether he's given that freedom to do it or the feelings that he can do it, he does it for Arsenal, he can do it for England. And I think it's interesting that a lot of people were getting quite offended. I read Martin Samuel's observations about how he opined upon Gareth Southgate and how he'd thrown Gareth Southgate under the bus and maybe he should walk a mile in Gareth Southgate's shoes, be at the level of achievement before he starts doing it. What do you want? Is there anything that anyone disagrees with what Thomas Tuchel has said about England's performances, specifically in the Euros last year?
I think sometimes those clips, when they're just the clips, they can look as if that's what they're doing. But actually, if you watch the whole interview, I don't think that's what Thomas Tuchel was doing at all. I think he was just making observations.
He asked a very specific question. He talked about a disassociated side that had a culture that wasn't necessarily right and didn't have a pattern of play. And I think if anyone was really honest, they would look at the England team that played in the Euros last year and say, what have we heard from Thomas Tuchel? Thomas Tuchel's been set up here to do one thing. He hasn't been brought in to maintain the status quo. He hasn't been brought in to go into a tournament and be competitive. He's been brought in on the back of a short-term contract, with the nationality thing being put to one side again, as it once was with Capello and once was with Sven-Goran Eriksson, to win a tournament for England. I
think it's interesting where he talks about fear, which is the biggest enemy, well, in any occupation you're in. To be afraid to... Well, I always used to say the biggest mistake you can make is to be afraid to make one. So I kind of like this thing about, OK, let's park the fear. And he wants the players to be free in their minds. And when you're free in your minds, anything is achievable. So I get that. I don't see that necessarily as a criticism of the previous manager. It's just what I'm about as an individual and what I'm going to bring to the group. And I'm going to take that fear away, guys. I know it's a big responsibility playing for your country, but we have to fully engage. But first of all, the system for them to be effective, and people talk about tactics and, but people will say that tactics really is just plays one part of it. Of course it does, but, it gives you the platform to go and be successful. And I think at the moment, he's just stoking the engine. He's looking to see what works best for this group. Will it be a 5? Will it be a 4? Like in the second half, we changed completely, to be honest. Skelly went into midfield and played, didn't he, more as an 8. And we played with 3 at the back. In the first half, we had 4 that were sitting there. We weren't probably getting a little bit... Walker is an interesting one, but I think he needed to stay back because Dan Burns is susceptible to pace.
With respect to this conversation, which I will bow to your knowledge on every single time, aren't systems almost relatively academic when we're playing teams like Latvia and Albania that we're going to beat unless there's a bloody disaster?
No, well, Albania have got quite a respected record now. They've never really conceded too many goals.
Sure,
in the Euros.
but prima facie, they're not an opposition that's going to really give us the jeopardy.
They tactically know their stuff
when we start playing, and they may well do. But on a player-by-player basis, we're going to be a better side than they are. So really and truly, the structure of English football is going to come up into a test when it plays against Spain, or it plays against one of the better sides.
And it's going to be so difficult to get to those games because we're not going to probably engage with one of those teams until you get to a quarter-final of a World Cup. That's the next time they'll probably play a team that level. They're not going to play anybody. They're not scheduled to play anybody ranked higher than 17th between now and next March, when we don't know if they're going to be in friendlies or in playoffs or whatever.
No, this manager is telling us it's the players that will decide the way we play. He's not coming with a preconceived idea. This is the system.
But Simon's got a great point, because he actually talked about this yesterday, and you would have heard this. He said, formations are for kick-off and for restarts.
And players adjust.
That's about it. He said, because apart from that, the players have got to be able to... Football is so fluid nowadays that the players have got to be able to almost look at the scenario and change for themselves and adapt as the game goes on. And one of the things that, if you listen to the players this week, they've been saying, is that he's empowering them not only to have tough conversations amongst themselves, uncomfortable conversations, but if they spot a problem, they've got to deal with it. Is that the right way of doing it?
Yeah, but it all works from a structure.
Well, he's talked about structure. He's not saying there's no structure.
You dismiss it.
I'm not dismissing it.
You do. I've been involved in a situation where people looked at Arsene Wenger and the way they played, and Henri coming in off the line, and Ashley Cole getting down the sides. Was it all off the cuff? No, it wasn't. We practiced it on the training ground.
Yeah, and he's saying
to the nth degree.
You can't do that over and over again with this
You
group,
want your opponent to think it's something you just off the cuff, but really it's all done.
But to some extent, with due respect to, again, your knowledge, you have players at Arsenal that Arsene Wenger was able to... When you just reeled off 2 players, Ashley Cole and Thierry Henry, that most people would say in their particular positions were 2 of the best players in the world. So if you put really good players into a decent structure, they're going to be successful. If you put poor players into a really good structure, you're going to be unsuccessful. So you've got to have the material to work with rather than just the structure.
Yeah, but if you've got really good players and a really good manager, then you've got perfect harmony. Then you've got a World Cup success.
Indeed.
And that's what we're trying to determine.
Indeed.
It's all very early in the day,
what he's
by the
asking
way.
players to do, if you get picked for your country, you should be the very best in class. You should be able to do precisely what is expected of you, which is to be brave,
so
to be active.
Let's take you to the Phil Foden situation. Is Phil Foden, is he the best right winger that we have in English football?
Of course he's not.
So he's been played out of position,
Correct.
Hasn't he? So when he gets the ball and he doesn't attack the fullback,
that's why,
why would you be surprised as a manager?
I've also seen Phil Foden playing for Man City wide on the right and rip Liverpool a new one in a particular game.
Not really running past people, change of pace.
My memory may serve me incorrectly then, because I remember him doing
passing, it's into the 10.
But we're also talking about an opposition they should be capable of performing at a level. What he's basically saying to England players, if we want to single Foden out, let's not do that for this conversation. He's saying to English players, you are the very best in class. So that means when I expect you to, the very bare minimum is to go out and exhibit that every time you play for England. He's changing that mentality. He wants teams to fear England so that the psychological barrier when you go onto a field when they play the bigger opposition, they'll be as worried about us as we have spent our entire last 8 years under Southgate being worried about them.
But look, if you're playing Phil Foden on the wide on the right, and you want to give him plenty of the ball, what you have is you have Walker raiding down the right-hand side, which we never had. But then you can have Foden being effective.
But you said to me
he was pretty well isolated in attacking sense.
You said you listened to a lot of what Thomas Tuchel said. Did you hear the bit about what he said about why he picked Phil Foden?
You're going to tell us.
Well, he said the reason is that Phil's had a difficult season with his club and he hasn't found the rhythm of last year. So we called him up to show him the love and to show him that we are with him. So I think by putting me in the team, he's basically saying, I put you in the out of position, but I wanted to get you involved because I want you to show that you're a big part of our future. So it wasn't necessarily playing him out of position, it was putting him into the team because he wanted him to be part of the group.
Yeah, but he's trying to lift the player, isn't he?
Exactly.
It's a play on words. He's trying to lift him, again, after the criticism that comes, because everybody wants to wade in this country. You know, everybody wants to see someone dropped, when actually... You know, it's about finding the right minutes for people. Is that the case,
or what people want to see is what they would expect to hear and see from players? We get to hear a lot from players about what they're worth and what they should get and who they should be playing for. You get an England shirt on, go do it. In whatever environment you're in, go and do it, and that's what people expect from them. So when you say people, what you seem to believe is that people can't have a critical observation. If Phil Foden isn't doing a particular job, if he's doing a great job, he should be praised.
I'm just trying to tell you that. So Lewis Skelly on the left-hand side is responsible for our goal, wasn't it, the first goal? So we've got plenty of players getting down the left-hand side. So Rashford can cut inside, and then there's a bit of width created by the fullback. On the right-hand side, Walker never really got out of our half in the first half. So Phil Foden's not really got the same sort of people around him that he would have.
Yeah,
he's a wonderful footballer.
He is.
We're very critical. He's not going to run at the fullback aggressively time and time again. So the manager, if he wants that from him, he's not going to get that.
The Aston Villa centre-back Tyrone Mings is set to land a role on the board of directors for Euro 2028, which will take place in Great Britain and Ireland, and will combine playing Premier League football with organising the tournament over the next couple of years. Debbie Hewitt, the FA chair, naming her board this week to deliver the finals in 3 years' time. It's understood that Mings has been earmarked for a position. Why now are we only deciding to involve active players and consulting them about the biggest tournaments in football, Simon? Is this a sign of forward thinking or football authorities ceding power to players again?
I don't know. What is the basic function of this board? To
deliver the tournament, to be the organising committee.
Right. Okay. So to what end is Tyrone Mings' role going to be?
Well, player representation, I imagine.
But again, I don't know if I don't know what tasks he's being allocated, and I don't know what the functionality of his role is. I can't really say whether it's progressive or not. There's no reason for players not to have an opportunity to be involved in discussions. If he's going to provide the idea of what a player may or may not want to see going into a tournament, or what engages players so that they are facilitated solutions that enable them to be locked in a room where the only thing they have to worry about is their performance, I don't see any disadvantage to that. I don't think it's about ceding players authority to players. He will be a senior player at that stage, and so opinions and having different views can't be a bad thing. My argument about players sitting at tables when it comes to union representation is when they start telling people what they don't want to do. We already know what players don't want to do. They don't want to play as many games. They want to do this. We know all that. Right? Tragedy is when you've got all these wage bills to pay. That's the reasons why you're playing so many games. In this instance, if you're trying to get some input into the structuring of a tournament and seeing it from a player's point of view and facilitating solutions to players, I would have thought they already knew this. I would have thought that there's little to learn, but if they think there is, then why not?
Are you surprised that they
That's
haven't...
a disrespectful thing to say, isn't it? Let's not have any former players involved or current players, and let's not... I think it's a collective thing to do.
Are you surprised that hasn't been done before, though?
What are they going to do?
Yeah, it is a little bit. You say it's not been done before, but I always point to Charles Alcock, who was actually, it was his idea who laid out the FA Cup, the Challenge Cup that we all look at, and the England-Scotland game, first international, was all brainchild of a former player.
That was when the game was an amateur game.
So that was, because people wanted to develop the game. So you say that people have played the game have never been a part of the administrators.
We're saying
that's what you're saying.
I didn't say that. I said, are you surprised?
Why have they never done it before? So they were there at the very beginning. Players who actually took...
What we're suggesting is that major tournaments, which were not around in 1850, have recently been organised by mainly retired players or chief executives from FAs.
I think it's
This is the first time that someone has been co-opted onto a board while still playing. Is that a good thing?
It is a good thing. It is a good thing because you get the modern day player. You find out what he's played but 2 years ago for his national team. So he's a recent international. And I think it's good to have that view.
So what kind of wisdom do you think he'll impart?
Well, I'm not going to be in the meetings. I'm not actually a part of the committee.
You said it's a good thing.
I'd like to have been a part of the committee.
So what sort of input... Let's rephrase the question then. What sort of wisdom would you like him to impart?
Well, he's a recent day player, isn't he? So maybe
so
bring something
to... Because you're a player.
Well, what young people do in any workplace, they bring you energy, don't they? Vibrancy, new ideas.
Right, like what?
Well, I'm not actually a part of that. I'm not being asked to be a part of it.
You keep on saying to me repeatedly, and you just characterise something that I didn't say, right? Which is that I don't want players involved in discussions. I have never said that. So if you have a strong view on players being involved in things like this, what views would you like to see imparted? Because I don't know what he's going to be doing. I've got no claim or issue with him being involved. I don't know what role he's going to perform. So given the fact you like all this, tell us what you'd like to see being done.
I don't really know because I haven't applied myself to the questions, right? But I could do.
Okay, I could work on this if you want me to. Is it about making sure that you can get to the stadium at a certain point? Is it to ensure that training facilities that are available to all the teams should be of a certain level? Is it dressing room standards? What is it? What's the kind of things that need to be improved?
I don't know his role and responsibility. You should ask Debbie this, shouldn't you? Not asking me.
Well, I haven't spoken to her. Have you spoken to her recently?
No.
So we've made a big thing, haven't we, about St George's and how much of a success is that? And I'm wondering how much of the influence was from the players or the intellectual capital around what players may need. Because ultimately, I'm assuming that the one thing you want to do is make sure that the solutions that players want are actually provided for. Otherwise, what is the purpose of the environments that you're creating? So I'm assuming when you've got major clubs like Arsenal and Spurs and Manchester United, less Man United right now because they stink, but Liverpool and whatever else, they look at their environments and go, they don't want to get the worst from the players, do they? They want to get the best. So the interesting dynamic is what is the gap that Tyrone Mings or a current player is going to fill?
So what
intelligence is he going to give?
So is that not more informative than a committee member or somebody from the local council? Well,
that's assuming, again, that the committee members were the people that were the intellectual capital behind St George's, for example. I'm assuming they went to the people...
Was that done entirely correctly then? Was it in the right place?
We are spending our entire life lauding... But up until...
Did anyone ask the players where they wanted to be based before their international matches? If they at Wembley?
I'm assuming that given that people have lauded and applauded St George's and said it's a wonderful place for players to be at...
But it creates another step before an important home international, so I don't think that's perfect.
Well, there you go. That's the kind of thing, I suppose, that the organising committee want to know, right? That things like that.
There's an example.
Tyrone Mings doesn't want to be
between the two things.
So they have to go and stay down in London and chain at Spurs before every home international.
And that requires a player to decide that, does it?
Well, they should be. Wouldn't it have been ideal, more efficient, just stay in one place?
I would also look at the idea that what Tyrone Mings doesn't want to be is he doesn't want to be a token representation of an industry. He wants to have real meaning and substance.
Well, he's an articulate individual.
I'm sure he is, but that doesn't mean that necessarily you're going to get any value in the conversation.
Yeah, but he played in recent tournaments, didn't he? So he's, those sorts of logistics.
So I'm assuming that someone like, if Thomas Tuchel were managing the England team in that particular tournament, which is unlikely, he would need the players to tell him what environments they would be best served in for a tournament. I think that's ludicrous, don't you? I think if the manager doesn't know what environment he wants his players in building up to a tournament, why is he the manager?
Yeah, but he's an international manager, brand new, isn't he? So
he's
the
a
players
club manager first.
Yeah, but the players he's inherited
second.
have actually been in 4 or 5 different finals.
Right.
Look how well England have done in recent times.
Right.
You know, so we're tapping into that information, aren't we?
I don't know.
That's all
I don't know what information
surely
we're
that's
getting.
all they're doing. In a collective board, they've got the view of the player. So how do you see this in terms of like numbers of days between matches?
There's an interesting characterisation that you wanted to frame it through, which is, are we ceding more authority to the players? No, I don't think so. I think ultimately players have a right to have an opinion. They are the major beneficiaries of the game. They are the talent of the game. But there are head cooks and there are bottle washers. And the bottle washers are the players and the head cooks are the managers and the people that make decisions. Otherwise, what is your job? Of course you should consult. And if Tyrone Mings is going to add some meaning, or whoever it may be, whether it's Tyrone Mings or whoever, right? The bottom line is it'd be curious to see what it is that they are going to impart, because I would imagine, put aside Debbie Hewitt, I mean, I think the FA are a bunch of clowns anyway, but put aside that, if they don't know what's required for players, given the fact they've got access to an international manager that's managed at domestic level, they've got access to a whole network of people that are really geared towards understanding what players require, then I don't know what they're doing. With respect,
I'm delighted, having listened to last Monday's show, that you two, sparked into life there. That was good. That was my favourite part so far.
Shut up, Sam. Would
you be interested if you were asked to be on a panel like this? Would you be interested?
I do feel it's interesting. Yeah.
He doesn't even know what he would do. I just gave him an example to give it. He's been banging on forever about player welfare. I give him an opportunity to say it, and he comes up with nothing.
Because you want to know what your role and responsibility
right
is, isn't it? You go to a tournament. What is it you need from me?
I said, what would you want
I
to
imagine
do? What would you
that's
see
what Tyrone's
imparted?
going to be presented with, isn't he?
Giving you a
Tell
major
us how it was
campaigner for how
was it for
maligned
you in
players
the last
are.
tournament? What was it like travelling around? You played all those games. It's going to be spanning a month.
It was in Germany.
Brilliant. Should managers involve themselves in a war of words with players or just rise above the criticism? The reason we're talking about this is because Steve Bruce hit back at Dwight Gayle after the former Newcastle striker criticised his tactical approach during their time together at St James's Park. Bruce, who's currently the Blackpool boss, won at the weekend. They're up into 10th in League One. Was in charge of the Magpies between 2019 and October 2021 before being replaced by Eddie Howe shortly after the club's takeover by the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia. Speaking on the Open Goal podcast this week, Gayle recalled how Bruce's disregard for small details left him shocked during a 5-0 defeat at Manchester City in 2020.
Like you say, he didn't really do much on the training pitch. But then, obviously, when the Saudi owners came in, he stuck his boots on and the whistle, and it's like, he was like, if I'm going, then I'm going to run you into the ground or something like that. So we're doing some running drills and he's just run us and he's blowing his whistle and he's just like making it into a little bit of a joke and stuff. He's like, they're over there watching me. Like some of the boys got chucked into the Man City shift. Basically, I think
what does that mean?
We had a 3-game week, and I think Gaffer sort of chucked a few of the boys under the bus in terms of who had to play against Man City away. And me and Matty Ritchie was asking for like tactical improvements for weeks or months or whatever, and then we come in at half time and I think it was like 2 or 3-0 or something down, and he's like, boys, like, you keep asking for tactics, I don't do tactics, just put your boots on and work hard. That's like, and then we're like,
a few bits to say on it, but should we address it first of all with Steve Bruce, give him the chance to come back, because he also didn't hold back when he was asked about those comments yesterday.
Is that the legendary Dwight Gayle, is it, who missed the chance in the quarter-final against Manchester City? Is that the same Dwight Gayle? Okay, interesting. Been around the block a long, long time. I've only managed 1,050 games, but according to Dwight, I don't know what I'm doing. So I like other people make their mind up and a bit more established than what Dwight ever was.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah, fascinating, because it did seem to be like a little bit of a war of words between the two, didn't it? I mean, what did you think?
I think Steve should have risen above it. I think that was a laddie environment with 2 non-critical little mates sitting opposite him, guffawing at what he said. Bruce managed for me a long time ago. The one thing he did do was get himself on the training ground. Now, obviously, long time has passed. Dwight Gayle, to me, average player, played at Palace. I think Steve told me a couple of years, 2-3 years ago, about the sort of contract demands, maybe a little bit longer than that Dwight Gayle thought he was entitled to play at Newcastle, the money he was on and not money he wanted. I don't know why he wants to make those observations, and I doubt that there's anything seeded in accuracy, but it will play to the gallery of the people at Newcastle that didn't appreciate Steve Bruce, didn't like him as a manager, didn't like his brand of football. And to suggest that the chronological order is probably... I don't think Bruce was there any period of time when the Saudi ownership took over. I think
literally a couple of weeks,
I think they went straight in the door, and he went out the other door, didn't he?
Yeah, it was.
So I don't know what the point is, but if I was Steve Bruce, if I had spoken to Steve about it, I'd have said to him, why would you bother with that little twerp and what he thinks?
I agree with that. Although you can have open opinion. I obviously, I'm not trying to canvass my book, but I have recently spoken very openly about managers which disappointed me. But I think, Steve Bruce doesn't have to justify...
So you the 1990s Dwight Gayle, is that what you're saying?
No, I don't. As I say, I don't think Steve Bruce 1,000+ games.
Yeah.
Quite remarkable.
1,050 games.
Doesn't need to justify himself, does he? He's had many good jobs. He's now doing a good job actually at Blackpool right now. I believe they beat Northampton at the weekend. So life is good for him again. Dwight Gayle, from my memory, he was I don't know, he looked like he was going to be an Ian Wright type finisher, but that never really happened for him. I think he played was there 6 years at Newcastle, wasn't he? So something like 130 odd games, 32 goals.
As well whilst he was at Newcastle.
But he's entitled to his opinion. He's worked with a lot of managers. He can say what he wants, and it is sometimes disappointing when you're a player and you a big name comes in to manage, and then there's that disappointment. But I think you have to show respects on both sides. By and large, it probably stays in the locker room most of what I did in my career. Although there are a couple of managers that I just couldn't hold it down when I was writing this book. I needed to say a little bit, and you have to be honest.
We don't have to be.
Well,
I think you can be.
I think if you're writing,
if you write a book, yeah, but if you don't have to go on a podcast and
well, no,
berate
I
a
wouldn't
manager
actively
unless you want
have gone after him. No, I don't think I would have done. Not in the podcast situation, but there are moments when you get asked questions, and
basically, what Dwight was suggesting was that Bruce didn't lift a leg until the Saudis came in.
But they must have been very short period together there.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's probably writing something in your book about the experiences. And I've read your book, so I know what you've said about people, and I think it's probably most of it being fair. Right, that's your view on it, the situation. In this instance, what it was, in my view, and I always find myself defending Steve because I like him as a friend. I also liked him as a manager, even though we had our differences at the time. And I think sometimes there has been dished out some treatment I don't think he's entitled to. And I think sometimes also at West Bromwich Albion, I thought he was poor at West Bromwich Albion when he went to West Bromwich Albion to do a job for them. But when someone sits in a little room with a couple of little twerps laughing and guffawing about the fact that a manager doesn't lift a leg, and actually only lifted a leg when the Saudis walked in, as if that was somehow he was going to punish the guys that were only going to get a benefit of the Saudis being in. And I think it's a bit silly, and I think it's beneath Dwight Gayle, or maybe it isn't, but it's certainly beneath Steve Bruce to respond to it. He doesn't need to. He doesn't need to respond to that, and the fact he's bitten on it means we're now discussing it.
How many levels have they gone up though since those days? If you think about since the Saudi takeover, where they are now to where they were when all those things happened and they were changing hands.
Newcastle.
Yeah, it's gone to a different stratosphere, hasn't it?
Yes, and Eddie Howe picked it up really quickly where they were in the table. Went on this amazing run just to keep them into the Premier League, and then I think he bought extremely well. We talked Dan Burns is a player we've been talking about a lot. Trippier, I think if you buy well, then they can go the journey with you. How much of this journey we'll see with Eddie there. He's just won a cup, of course. They now have to have they want to use that financial clout that they've got, Simon. They can't really do it.
Well, there's no doubt Eddie Howe's done a brilliant job. The reservations I had about Eddie Howe were ill-founded based upon when he went into the job, based upon the fact he didn't take the Celtic job, based upon the fact that I felt he played a style of football at Bournemouth that might be seen as undoing at Newcastle. It hasn't. He's bought well. He's managed well. Coach. He's a brilliant coach. He's a thoroughly likeable bloke. He's one of the decent ones. Yeah. And he's exacted from players everything that he should have exacted from them as a good manager. And you look at them, and you look at the way he's bought, and you look at the people that he's brought in alongside him to work with him. Tyndall being one of them, which is obviously his old mate, but he
elevates his staff as well. I like that.
Well,
I like the way that he does that.
He's quite comfortable not being in the spotlight. He's always been the same.
But he's the manager.
I've known him for 20 years.
But he knows who he is.
Yeah.
So people that really know who
some people would say Tyndall's been a bit busy. you know.
No,
but
it
actually,
works well.
But no, hear me out. But the manager thinks, no, I think he's really good qualities about him, so he can step up and do this.
Interestingly, there was rumours of a rift between those two guys when Tyndall took over at Bournemouth after Eddie Howe departed.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know whether that's right or wrong. What I do know is Eddie Howe has done a really good job. I still maintain that the difficulty for Newcastle to go on to the next level beyond winning a League Cup, because they're not going to be able to give them the financial runway that Manchester City and Chelsea were to be able to build a football team out of someone else's money. They're not going to have that runway. So the fact they've won a League Cup is remarkable for their fans. The challenge for them is, as soon as a legacy club's got the dough to buy Alexander Isak, he will be going.
There was a pitchside confrontation in which a fan allegedly attempted to get at or punch Wrexham captain James McClean over the weekend. It's going to be scrutinised by the FA. Police said that they were said to have intervened after a Stockport County fan apparently attempted to attack McClean at half-time at the racecourse ground on Saturday. McClean faced abuse from visiting fans as he made his way to the tunnel area after a first half which had seen him help his side win a penalty. It was quite a controversial penalty. Ball came in from the left-hand side, deep towards the far edge of the penalty area. He was there, tried to send it back across, but he had a little nudge on the defender. The defender threw himself up into the air, hit the hand, and after quite vociferous appeals, he said he was demanding a penalty. The referee consulted with the linesman, gave the penalty, and the Stockport fans weren't happy about it. But it's not the latest controversy that he's been involved in. He's been in quite a lot, and he always seems to draw the ire of the visiting supporters or the opponent's supporters. And actually, he was in the studio talking to us in November, talking about the fact that this has happened to him a few times, and as a result, he wouldn't hesitate to protect himself if it did become physical on the field of play.
At the end of the day, I'm there to do a job, and if in any way where I feel under pressure or threatened, I'm going to act upon it myself because I'm not there to. So if someone was on the pitch, at the end of the day, I'm protecting myself first and foremost, and whatever happens after that happens. But and I'll make no apologies for that, because at the end of the day, I'm there to play football. No one else has a right to be on the pitch, especially if I feel my safety is endangered, then I'm going to act upon it, and that should never be the case.
He's got a point, hasn't he? The fact is that if you are playing football, you need to be protected, and no one else should be on the pitch apart from those who are permitted to be so.
Yeah, obviously there's a lot of controversy around this player, and it'd be nice to sort of separate that. You know, he appealed for a penalty, and the referee linesman consulted, and he was granted a penalty. People want to take it into different areas. I don't know why the fan, you'll have to ask him, got so involved. There's no place for that, stepping onto the pitch. Obviously he was dealt with by the authorities, and obviously James has got this ongoing issue where he doesn't wear the poppy, doesn't want to honour that. But I think what you have to do is understand where he's coming from. He was brought up in Derry in a council estate where 13 people were shot dead, innocent civilians. 26 people were shot actually by the British Army, and therefore he wants to separate himself from that. Now, I don't think we should, you know, you'd like to think when he plays a game of football we judge him on what he's doing on the football pitch, but maybe that wasn't the case.
I think that's fair, Martin. I think there's absolutely no place for a fan to be attacking a player on the field, irrespective of what the player does and doesn't do during the game or what his beliefs are. Where people become disillusioned with James is the videos that he put up of himself in a balaclava, talking to his children with, I think, armed weapons in the same picture. So there was a sort of outlook that he probably looks back on with regret now. But I think if he doesn't want to wear the poppy, that's his gift. And I understand the reasons why, for a terrible situation that happened back in 1972. James doesn't wear the poppy, but now James has taken it upon himself not just to not wear the poppy, he's now taken it upon himself for those that are wearing the poppy, he now stands away from them. So he draws even more attention. Now, that doesn't give anybody the right to behave the way that they seem to want to abuse James McClean, but he does bring some of this heat on himself. As far as this situation is concerned, there's no need to conflate whatever James's beliefs are about the poppy into this instance. This is a fan that probably is aware of James McClean because of this stance. James has been very vociferous about getting a penalty, got a penalty, the fans lost his control, and he should be booted out of the stadium. And James McClean, that clip that we played is slightly disingenuous of us, because he's talking about the Poppy situation and the attitude that fans exhibited to him when he was standing separate from the players that he played with when he didn't wear the Poppy back in November of the year just gone. Not about fans coming on the field and attacking him because he's a football player.
But the point, I suppose, that the producer there was trying to make was the fact that he has to think about these things because he has raised his profile, I suppose.
Well, but again, the prism that he was asked the question through was about the Poppy. This is not about the Poppy. This is not about the resistance that people feel, that the strength they feel towards this valued item. This is a player doing something on a football field that a fan has decided he doesn't like. So when does that stop then?
Yeah, and that's the key thing, isn't it? About taking strong action in those circumstances.
Absolutely
if you're
right.
a player on the field of play, you'd expect the authorities and the club to take strong action. Both clubs.
Yeah, and that was done at the weekend. He was removed, wasn't he? Ejected from the football ground. Yeah, it's not going to stop people, isn't it, to being angry?
Have you ever been a subject of because I mean, look, you were quite a recognisable figure. You would rub some people up the wrong way occasionally.
West Ham fans, you mean?
Do you ever feel threatened being on a football pitch?
Do you know, if you played at Millwall at the Den, when you walked out and the coins were hitting the fences as you walked out, yeah, you felt threatened. Of course you did. Personally, I think West Ham, there was one incident where somebody just wanted it with me, and you just feel, you know, I luckily was dragged away from that situation.
But you said you were dragged away from that situation. Were you going to engage?
Well, it was just when you got people on a football pitch, when I'm suffering discrimination, where you got 10,000 fans, you know, singing "Keown's got a monkey's head," you know, I think that you could get a little bit angry, and you feel that's directed at me. I don't think anyone would be subjected to that now. But you know, at the end of the day, one particular fan, lots of tattoos, was goading me, and it was kind of like, okay, let's pick the biggest guy.
And what happened to
I
that
calmed
guy?
down. That's what happened.
Well, what
I
happened
came
to
to
that
my
guy?
senses. Nothing. Everybody, no one.
Was that Bergkamp involved?
Nobody. Yeah, Bergkamp was involved. The media, no one reported on it. It was just, I was fair game. Back in the day, that's how it was. You just had to accept. I don't think it was right and proper, really.
So does it please you that now that
yes,
there
of
is
course.
a better course of action that
Of course,
happens in those circumstances?
Look, he's got his political beliefs. He's come through a very difficult situation. Nobody can, you know, he stands up for his beliefs. People can celebrate, you know, the Poppy and what it stands for, and he's not going to say you can't do that. I'll stand alongside you, but away from you.
And there is an argument that football invites it. I've always been a main supporter of the Poppy, because I think it actually, with the exception of James McClean's belief system and people who have that belief system because of that instance in 1972, that it stood for the liberation predominantly of everybody, irrespective of ethnicity and sexuality. But also, I don't know why, when we suddenly decided that actually we needed to put it on football fields, because I argue about symbols being put on football fields, and I've always defended the Poppy, but I'm becoming more and more inclined to say, why does football always feel that it needs to involve itself in causes, and then having the audacity? I know that the Rangers fans were a conversation last week of telling the Rangers fans they can't put posters up, whilst football endlessly tells people what it thinks about taking the knee, or rainbow flags, or Palestine, or Israel, or Ukraine, or whatever else. Yet when the proletariat do it, the poor little man in the street that pays his money to go into a football stadium and has his opinion, he's told by the football establishment, sit down and shut up.
So you say that they shouldn't celebrate the servicemen, the great job they do to protect our country?
You absolutely, you celebrate it on Remembrance Sunday like everybody else does.
He's not
But
saying
not
that
on a
at all.
football pitch.
I think there's an argument.
But then it's the
for it.
working class man's game, isn't it? It's, you know, invariably he's fought to protect his country, and he wants to celebrate
But what
that.
Simon is saying is that what we've got into the habit of doing, and it's
I
not
know.
just it's politicising football, but then penalising the supporters when they've tried to do the same. And you can't have it both ways. So actually, what Simon's he's not even talking about necessarily the Poppy. He's talking about the wider scope of football, where you can't then have a go at other people for expressing their views if you are going to impart on everybody that they've got to express a certain one that you're happy with.
Well said.
But again, I think with James McClean here, he's got his view.
He does,
and he's been,
he does.
You know, he knows the loved ones. Everybody knows somebody in Derry. You know, their closeness. We're only one generation away.
But the thing about it is, Martin, if we didn't have, because we didn't always have the Poppy on the shirts, if we didn't have this, then James McClean wouldn't then be the subject of people's ire for his views on it.
Yeah.
What about Sean Dyche? Because his former club Everton are moving to a new stadium as well, but he didn't get to take them there. That's now passed over to David Moyes. He was on the on talkSPORT yesterday with Johnny Owen for 2 hours. It was brilliant listening, actually. He was very open, he was very candid, he was fun, he was engaging, he was everything you'd expect Dyche to be, actually. He was talking about Everton as well, and, you know, the fact that he'd left them in good shape, but in the end, he felt that some of the players couldn't cope with the weight of expectation that comes with being an Everton supporter.
I learned about the size of the club and the feel and the weight of it. I was all right, but you could see it in the players. And I went, it was time for me to go and have a chat with Kev Farewell and go, listen, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm thinking. I'm putting it out there for the club because I insisted that it was in a better shape when I left it than when we got there. Yeah. We'd come through the challenges, and I knew deep down they just needed a new, you know, football's a weird business. Sometimes you just need a new voice, and you need a new, you know, small details can change. And a new manager going in, and Moyes, who I admire a lot, I think he's a fantastic manager and a good bloke as well. Yeah. Spoke to him as well, by the way, been very open about that. Told him they're in good shape, told him there's a lot of good there. Yeah. And I'm delighted for him. I'm delighted they're going well.
That was him talking about the fact that he sort of almost engaged the conversation when leaving the football club,
suggesting to the people in charge, look, you need a new boss.
Yeah,
I mean that's big of him. Obviously, he's reading the room, and he realises that the players maybe need a different voice. I thought actually did a really good job there for the first 2 years, particularly obviously the backdrop of all those points that were deducted in the second year. I think when he took over from Frank Lampard, whatever it was for Frank, he couldn't quite get the players to perform to the level certainly Sean Dyche did.
I think if you look back at Everton's history over the course of the last 5 or 6 years, you've had familiar cycles, haven't you? You've had a manager comes in, makes impact, manager keeps them in the division, manager starts the next season, and then all of a sudden it starts not to live up to the next level of expectation.
It's been a process of erosion, hasn't it? I mean, David handed over, and various managers David Moyes have come in. You know, Marco Silva, the Belgian manager.
Roberto
Martinez came in, and obviously you had Silva come in later on, and you've had Ronald Koeman in there, you've had various people in there. Ancelotti to me was a strange appointment. I always felt it was a strange appointment. I felt that at the time it was a money appointment rather than a project appointment for.
Didn't they finish in the top 5 or 6?
They did, but I always believe that Ancelotti, they certainly finished higher than they've done recently.
Higher than recently, but they didn't finish in top 5.
And you now look at it and go, where are they? I like Sean. I've always liked Sean. And I think it's an interesting narrative that you want to create, that you were effectively recognising, you know, your own demise by suggesting someone else is ready to come in. I'm not sure what that tells you about Sean as a manager, because the change in Everton is night and day between the performances under David Moyes and the performances under Sean Dyche. Sean sat in the studio with me and Jim 2 or 3 years ago, I think it was, talking about where he was after the Burnley situation and why he didn't feel that he wanted to look down the pyramid because he felt he had another Premier League job in him. And a Premier League job, you can't run the argument that Premier League managers need time to build things and then say 2.5 years into your job, actually, I've run my course.
Yeah, but isn't that because of the state of the club?
Well, the state of the club...
Because he hasn't had much time to... He hasn't had any opportunity to really reinvest in the playing staff.
So what is the difference in message from the way that Everton are playing under David Moyes? And I hate these comparisons, but they are relevant, and Sean brought it upon himself by having this conversation in the studio. The fact of the matter is, Sean took a Premier League job knowing the circumstances of Everton, knowing that ultimately there wasn't a lot of money around, and it was a preservation job, and a job to be... And I think they would have gotten relegated under Frank, so I think Sean needs to be given all the praise for keeping them in a situation where they are able to go into this stadium. But I think they were going potentially that way under Sean. And I think the way that Sean's team was setting up and the manner in which they were performing, they were moving towards a situation where they were going back into the jeopardy that he saved them from. And yet David Moyes has come in, and it is night and day.
But immediately, yeah, that's true. But hasn't that been the sort of pattern of events over a series of recent managers?
I don't think it was night and day in terms... I think
Frank Lampard left them and Sean Dyche came in, they immediately picked up.
But they weren't in a relegation zone. And what all Sean did was do the basics between stopping it.
When Frank came in, the same thing happened. He picked them up and they went like that straight away. And then for a year, from I think it was from Rafa Benitez that he took over. Frank.
Sure. I mean, the Rafa Benitez situation was just a ridiculous appointment. Nobody in their right mind, in any sensible mind, would ever put Benitez in that dressing room to manage Everton, knowing that the fact that the moment it went off the rails, the fan base was going to turn. Then you had the background of obviously the situation, the resistance towards Bill Kenwright and all that was going on at that particular time, and Graham Sharp couldn't go to the stadium, and all this sort of stuff with Denise as well. You may be right. You may be right.
There were
Maybe
lots of similarities. There are 2 seasons where they needed to win the last game of the season to effectively stay in the Premier League.
Yeah, my point really is
I do believe that they would have gone down.
It's deeper than just the manager, I think, at Everton.
But I think though that on this occasion, I think he's holding his hand up saying he maybe have lost the players. But I do feel that David Moyes did come in and change things.
Yeah, he did.
Definitely. Like the likes of O'Brien, for instance, was hardly looked at. He's played very well as a fullback, central defender playing fullback. Lindstrom as well has played mostly like a marking job on that side of the pitch. Ndai, he's out injured at the moment. Mangala's out. They played very well under Moyes, and he sort of created this sort of mid-pitch roadblock. They definitely played differently, and you saw a reaction. And Moyes now is still finding a way. It's a bit of a struggle at the moment because he's got so many players that are injured, and there will be some surgery needed at that football club.
Okay, one of the things that Sean sort of answered as well is the sort of common accusation that people say, well, you don't know what you're doing, and you shouldn't really be in charge and all that kind of stuff. And maybe there should be a little bit more respect for that. This is him talking about that.
People forget that. Fans are like, I don't know what he's doing. You're like, well, I do. For what I do, by the way. Made that absolutely clear, I do.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, your actual education would be, mine's probably cost about 35 grand, of licences, courses, management applied licences, all these things, so there is an actual learning curve now. It's not the old days of giving someone the keys and going, oh, you were captain, so now you're manager.
Yeah.
That just doesn't happen anymore. The education system of coaching is at a way deeper level than it's ever been. More and more availability of courses, more and more diversity of courses as well. You do psychology course, NLP course, sports science, do all these different things and add them into your toolkit, if that's your way of doing it, and so I think people maybe, you don't want the game to be too clinical. Of course, from fans, you don't want to sit there and go, oh well, he's done all them badges, but you just want a little bit more recognition that most managers do know what they're doing.
Do you think we appreciate the level of ability of an English manager in the Premier League, or are we quick to denigrate it? I mean, the fact is, if you get into the Premier League's the world league, really, isn't it? Everybody from every single country wants to work in the Premier League. They want to work in England. The fact that if Sean Dyche
get paid so much,
yeah. But that is why it attracts the very best talent.
So that's why when Sean trotting out, he's paid £35,000 on licensing fees to achieve salaries of £3 or £4 million a year is just silly. And the fact that you've done academic courses does not tell that you're a good manager.
No, but what he's saying is that he has done highly qualified courses to get to where he is. If you make bad decisions,
then people are going to suggest you don't know what you're doing. And ultimately, whilst it's a bit cruel and in the moment, football is everything in the moment. Yeah. Everything is judged in the moment. And so Sean addressing that issue when people have criticised the decisions he's made is I think, probably silly. Because if you know that you know what you're doing, you don't really have to get into a debate with someone that at that moment in time is watching his team getting beat or being bored rigid by his team's performances, which is what Everton fans were accusing Everton of. And the difference between Sean knowing what he's doing and making decisions that appeal to the audience are two different things. And football fans are very, very easily able to make very global observations without really looking at the micro stuff.
Do you know, I think it was a difficult time for him with Calvert-Lewin, the number of times that he was injured under his management.
Yeah, loads.
I did see, I've been withholding judgment a little bit on Sean Dyche because he went to Burnley, did an amazing job, and then I know it kind of fell over for him, and I actually pointed out to him, and I was trying to say to him, look, he had 10 really good years. One of them didn't work out.